Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for attending tonight's program, Granville's Open Space Levy, A History. I understand we might have some visitors from Franklin County who are interested in this concept, so I hope they made it in. We also thank the group behind the filming of the video. You will see tonight Jim Havens and Sherry and Ray Paprocki for thinking of the Granville Sentinel, or the Granville Historical Society, for this event. Well, okay. Okay. Tonight's program, like many of our other presentations, are made possible through the support of a fund established for the Historical Society by Dale and Tina Noble, he former president of Denison University. And before we proceed, we at the Historical Society are taking a major step forward this fall by establishing for the first time the position of director. So I would like to introduce the Historical Society's first ever director. It'll be a part-time basis, Karen Bailey, who will take this new part-time position next week, I believe. Karen, would you stand up? And she will be in the office starting Tuesday from 11 to 1? Yep. Okay, great. Okay. Tonight we will start out by presenting the video Granville Township Open Space, which tells the story of Granville Township's open space preservation program, starting with the passage in 1997 of a 1 mil property tax levy to raise funds to, number one, acquire title and development rights for farmland and open space properties, and two, helping to preserve areas of natural and scenic beauty, unusual geological significance, and open vistas. 3 years after the first levy was passed, an additional 2.5 mil levy received voter approval for the same purpose. It was retired in 2015 after township trustees decided not to collect its revenues for 1 year, followed by the decision not to seek its renewal. But the 1 mil levy has continued in effect. With proceeds from the two levies, the township has acquired, and these are rough figures, nearly 1,600 acres of land and 24 properties, both in the village and township, spending approximately $10 million up through the latest acquisition in 2023. We should also note that this video is thanks to the expertise of Todd Yarrington, who is here filming this over here, of Yarrington Studios, Westerville, and Denison University student Andrew Theophilus is helping us recording for the Granville Historical Society's YouTube channel. And this will be available on our YouTube channel. It doesn't look like it's going to be able to stream because we didn't have enough people signing on, which is unfortunate. And then following the video, we will have a panel discussion led by moderator Alan Miller, a Granville resident, Denison University journalism professor, and retired executive editor of the Columbus Dispatch. Panel members are Jim Havens, a real estate attorney who was a Granville Township trustee at the time the two levies were first passed, Keith Myers, a retired landscape architect who chaired the Open Space Committee recommending properties to be considered for acquisition, Bryn Bird, current Granville Township trustee, Norm Kennedy, a former Granville Township fiscal officer and Granville School District treasurer, and Doug Wagner, a Granville resident and local veterinarian who in 2000 helped to convince trustees to seek approval for the additional 2.5 mil levy, fearing that the amount raised for the first levy would not be enough. And Doug has also served on the Open Space Committee. And I think we'll probably have time for a question and answer period following the panel discussion. So let's start with a video, and then Alan will take over upon its completion. Thank you.
Granville always looked like the best of all worlds to me. as an urban planner. I loved the village. I thought it was a classic Ohio village or Midwestern village. It was, beautifully preserved for a number of reasons. And it had this beautiful hilly terrain and open space around the village that was far different than the rest of Central Ohio. And I thought it was just beautiful. It looked like a great place to be.
I'm Bryn Bird. I'm Granville Township trustee since 2018. Since 1998, when we began collecting revenue for open space purchases, we have collected $16 million from Granville Township residents through both a 2.5 mil levy that we used to collect that we stopped collecting on in 2014, and we've continued with a 1 mil levy since then. We've spent about $11 million altogether protecting a little under 2,000 acres. The open space program was started with the intent of protecting the rural character from encroachment, and we every day are so thankful for that. It protects our borders from annexation from municipalities that are close to us. It protects our waterways, so that way we don't have people who are trying to build right onto the waterways and our streams and rivers. And it's helping us to just really create the character that we want for the future. These beautiful large pieces of property in the downtown, in the middle of the village, that could just immediately become hundreds and hundreds of homes. And so it's, everybody tells us, this is the best part of our Granville Township, and people move here for this. I became a township trustee in a large part because my grandfather was a township trustee in Genoa Township, which is Westerville, Ohio, and that had really huge growth, big growth right after he was done being a trustee, and something that he spent a lot of his time really concerned about, high density development. And one of the things that he spent a lot of his career talking about was if they didn't think about where they wanted open space, where they wanted parks, where they wanted rec, now they'd have to go back and spend millions of dollars in the future to get that land.
In 1991, the township trustees at the time decided to purchase a piece of property, 52 acres, which became Salt Run Park. We purchased that piece because it was a strategic piece of property. The next thing that happened in the community was we started fearing outside developers coming in and building much more densely than what we were accustomed to and what our school system could support. We happened to have an opening on the township board. One of the trustees had to step down due to a retirement issue, and myself and Lyle King named Jim Havens to be the third trustee. And it turned out that he was the right man at the right time for the Granville community.
The Opera House was owned by the township, but it was on village property. And unfortunately, it had fewer and fewer functions as time went on. And ultimately, it burned down. The township had insurance money, and they provided some of the funds for Opera House Park, and the village did also. From there is how the open space really got going, because the rest of the insurance money was used for projects that Paul Treese, who was a township trustee then, a committee of his, formed, and they decided on projects over a period of years that money would go to. So that was the beginning. One of the first couple of projects I was involved in, one was the white property out on Loudon Street. And it was 3 parcels of farmland. And it looks the same today as it did back then. And that was the goal of trying to keep the township rural.
So the village of Granville is inside of the township, and we are actually, in fact, part of the township. The township, when it was designed, was 16,000 acres, and we are roughly not quite 4,000 acres of that portion. The open space program is extremely important to the village and to the township for a number of reasons. It protects scenic vistas, environmental concerns, boundaries with for the school to help reduce density, to also protect for annexations. We've used that in a number of ways to kind of buffer the boundaries, so to speak, between a number of different jurisdictions. When you kind of do an overall look at the map, it has helped us link together for different annexations, protect against high housing development, and we've used that as a tool for a number of things, and so it's been very beneficial. The preservation of the Granville Golf Course came up through a number of conversations over almost a year period. The golf course will help shape the community and has shaped the community since it's been here. It was commissioned in 1924, and a Scottish architect by the name of Don Ross designed that golf course. You know, it's a beautiful open space. It's operated for close to 100 years now as our golf course. And the vistas and the scenery, the lack of housing on it, it's just, you cannot replace that. And once it's gone, it's gone. And so it's just such a gem in the community.
I was originally appointed by the then Granville Township trustees to the Board of Zoning Appeals. That would have been in about 1992. I served there for 2 years. After that, I was appointed to the Zoning Commission. I served there for 2 years. And then when Paul Treese retired, I was appointed to the Granville Township Board of Trustees immediately prior to 1996. In 1997, the Ohio legislature enacted a new amendment to townships' ability to create levies. The important part of this piece of legislation was it was the first time that the state legislature empowered townships to pass levies, to collect funds from the community to acquire permanent open space through outright acquisitions as well as acquiring easements. And this was very different and unique and a wonderful new opportunity. Norm Kennedy was an exceptional fiscal officer, and what Norm would do if we received unbudgeted funds, he would set that money aside to be used for such luxuries as acquiring open space, for instance. And so you had the beginnings of it. Now with the passage of that legislation, what you had really was a predictable way in which you could anticipate revenue, and that gave the township the opportunity to create a sustainable process around it. So you could project how much revenue you would be receiving through levies based upon the tax base within the township and the village, and then you could plan for purchases. The other interesting thing when you have a levy, you can also borrow against that levy. So since you have a reliable stream of income from taxes, you could actually go out if you needed to and purchase property and then pay it back over time, either to the owner through tax-free bonds, or you could borrow the money from a bank. The passage of the 2.5 mil levy resulted because actually residents within the community came to us. They wanted to see even larger support for the experiment with the 1 mil levy. And at the time, it was obvious that the urban part of the metro area was starting to grow toward Granville, and there was a sense of urgency about buying open spaces and having available support to be able to do that.
The levy idea was something that Jim Havens mentioned to me. I had been aware of things like the Lincoln Land Trust in Massachusetts and aware of where communities had sort of rallied around the preservation of open space, through my professional work. And Jim mentioned it to me, and the idea of putting a levy on. I was chair of the Planning Commission and had co-chaired the Granville Comprehensive Plan with the village and the township in 1998. So I thought it was a terrific idea if we were able to get enough community support for it. And to my astonishment, really, the levy passed. It didn't pass by a lot the first time, but then shortly thereafter, we bought some key properties with it. One significant one in the village was the hillside across from Wildwood Park. And people began to understand what the impact of it might be. So 2.5 years later or so, they wanted to put a second levy on, and that one passed by a significant margin. So I really felt like, we were onto something. I didn't realize how far ahead of the curve we were and how important it would be, 20, 25 years later. But it's actually, I would say, rare that you're able to get a community to come together and choose to tax itself just for the purpose of preserving open space.
My name is Candy Moore. I am the president of the Brindle Commission. I was also chair of the Looking Land Trust for a number of years. I was on that board for about 20 years. I was also on the GreenSpace Advisory Committee in its early days.
The advisory committee was really very important for several reasons. First of all, you have village residents, you have township residents, and then you also have school supporters that live in both areas. By putting an advisory committee together, you could obtain the views and input of various different stakeholders. You also had members of village council, the township, the school board, and it also gave us a wonderful opportunity to tap some of the talent that was residing Keith Myers to assist us in directing how that fund should be used. The other important part of that advisory committee is, since we were protected under sunshine laws about developing a targeted list of important properties, Keith Myers called it our heat map, we could prioritize which properties we thought were most important and then budget our energy and efforts to acquire those in a prioritized way.
This property was owned by Dave Longaberger of Longaberger Basket fame. He was making it over into a residence and a corporate retreat, but he died before he could get it finished. The Longaberger company then ran into some financial challenges, so the rumor was that they were going to sell this property and the front lawn was going to be a housing development. This happened to occur during the time when we were concerned about rapid growth in the area and that impact on the schools. And so Jim Havens and I approached the Longaberger company about whether or not we could use our green space money from the tax levy to buy development rights. The answer was no. They wouldn't sell their development rights, but if we wanted, we could buy the whole property. And so we went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out how to do that, how to finance that. And ultimately we came up with a plan, and that's what we did. I was on council at the time, village council at the time, and what we did was we looked at what monies the village had available. They had some money in a park fund. They had the ability to borrow. The township had some money in the green space levy. So we essentially put all those things together. Spring Valley was the most challenging deals to put together, simply because you had a lot of community interest, both pro and con, and you also had a lot of different family members who owned the property, were involved in the property.
I graduated from Granville High School and I went on to Miami University and majored in geography and environmental science. After that, I became a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, And I remember teaching my first program to school children, and I was like, wow, I can get paid to do this? I get to teach kids outside about how amazing our planet is? My great-grandfather, Edwin Cox Roberts, purchased the land that Spring Valley Pool sat on in 1929. And then he built the pool and opened it in 1933. So it was open to the public. It started off as a kind of pond almost, like a dirt bottom swimming hole. And then eventually they put cement down and it came to be what it was by the time it closed in 2004. So it was open from 1933 to 2004, so for 71 years. It is on the corner of two major freeways into Columbus. And so there was a lot of discussion about development, but also the idea of that this was my family's inheritance. There were 16 stockholders for the Spring Valley Pool Company, and every one of those stockholders had an emotional connection to that land. And I honestly don't think that they would have agreed on anything besides preserving it. I think one reason why Spring Valley being preserved is so amazing is because so much land is being developed, especially right now with Intel. Like, I drive between Granville and Gahanna every single day, and it feels like once a month I see a corner where trees have totally been taken down. And so just knowing that the habitat that's being destroyed is just really, it really affects me, honestly.
Open space acquisition programs like the one in Granville give current generations an opportunity to really change that dynamic. It's a very difficult concept for those who are in government service to see their role as a proactive role, especially when it acquires property. They're used to the opposite. They're used to receiving requests to develop, controlling it. So I think it's a mindset in many ways.
To put things in perspective, 1,814 acres, if I do my math right, is about 11% of the total acreage in Granville Township.
The legacy of open space for anyone who's involved in trying to preserve it is really the generations that succeed you. In my case, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, but more than the personal aspect of it, which is profound, I think it's the entire community benefits significantly by the commitment that was made by the community 20 years ago to start on this process. I believe that now that the success of it is self-evident, future generations will be just as diligent in their pursuit of protecting what we all consider to be one of the most special places in the country.
What a fantastic history lesson we've learned in this well-done video we just watched. I just have to say, we should all salute the visionaries who put this idea into motion, and the taxpayers who have faithfully paid into this fund to preserve the character of this very special place that we all call home. So if we could have another round of applause, especially for those who were involved in the creation of this. And to all you taxpayers. So if I could get you on the panel to come on up here, we'll have a conversation. While they're getting seated here, I want to point out that Grace Gordon is here, and I don't know about you all, but the sound on that was just a bit low, and I don't know if you heard an important line that Grace said there when she said she wasn't sure her family would agree on anything, and then there was a pause, and what she said after that was, except preserving that property. So that is really important. So we've heard that, well, first, let me have you all run down the line here and introduce yourselves, just so we're sure everybody knows who's talking.
Very good. I'm Norm Kennedy. I was the former fiscal officer of the township.
Keith Myers. I was the first chair of the acquisition committee, open space acquisition committee.
I'm Doug Wagner. I succeeded him in the year 2000 on the chair of the open space committee, still serve in that position.
I'm Bryn Bird. I'm one of the trustees.
Jim Havens. I was a township trustee 96 to 2008.
We'll have to get used to this baton twirling here. So we heard that nearly 2,000 acres have been preserved so far, with more to come, we assume, right? Did you all have any idea 25 years ago how many acres this program might protect by this point? And is the number higher or lower than you anticipated? Who wants to take that?
I would have been astonished back then if somebody had told me that at some point we were going to acquire 2,000 acres. So I think it's a huge victory, far more than I ever expected.
I remember Norm Kennedy saying one time, New York City Central Park is the jewel of the city. And I think Granville Township can pretty much thank Norm and the others for creating a jewel that we can only begin to appreciate right now. 100 years from now, we'll look and say, wow, that's really something right
now. So my perception at the time was I really didn't know where it was going to lead. I just sort of had the sense of helplessness that we had after the Kenny annexation case. We had just no tools. And there was just this outcry. And
Hey, Jim, could you say what that is, the Kenny?
Yeah, sure. Park Trails is located on River Road, and it was under contract to be developed. And there was a lot of political tension about the development of that property over school issues. The property was in Granville Township. It was going to be annexed into Newark. And so Newark building standards and densities were going to apply into a property we could no longer control, but yet the school district was going to serve. And so it just sort of felt like we had very few ways and tools. And litigation is usually a poor way to manage and be proactive. And so, Norman is the one who pointed out to us, he would do a lot of our research, and he said, the Ohio Township Association has just passed, or has just notified us that there's this new law out there. And so it kind of became a tool. And I think we just sort of, like Keith had said, we felt a sense of urgency and just wanted to get after it. But I think it's exceeded all of our expectations.
Well, while you have the microphone, another look back to the beginning. Did you all have any idea or thoughts that properties like Brindue and the golf course would be part of this?
I did not. I was highly focused. So I would drive back and forth to Columbus, and everybody that I had a history with in Granville had been highly focused east. I was worried about west, and I thought we really should be focused on more borderline areas. Was really kind of my focus at that time. But over time, realizing the village residents, who were extremely generous to us, they would pay levies, and a lot of the action was out in the township. It was very nice to be able to see Candy Moore, who kind of took the lead on figuring out how we could preserve that Brindue mansion, and then also the golf course. So it was very nice to be able to create some balance about preserving some interior green space.
Anybody else want to speak to that?
don't have much to add to that other than, no, I never thought that the town, I thought there were parcels in the village and there proved to be that. I didn't expect it to be the golf course or the Rindu. You know, I thought those were pretty well taken care of, so.
Norm, did you want to? Okay. So this is one I'm sure you could all speak to. How different would Granville and Granville Township look today if not for the open space program and the properties that are in it now?
I just think so much of my, I'll say, proud of what they've accomplished here is Granville's just rural character. I'm just saying that right now. And without preserving the farmlands, there's no rural character. I mean, there's a feed mill, but rural character, you drive around, you have the landscape, the vistas, the views, all those things that I think all enjoy. I'm speaking for myself, but I think a lot of people like that. And a lot of what we try to do is preserve that rural landscape. That just it keeps the density down. It does so much for the community that way. And I think that's the thing that I would say is really one of the biggest accomplishments we had so far.
Yeah, so I think back when this all took place, I think it also set a precedent that set Granville Township apart from the communities that surround us. If you think about Newark and the annexation for Park Trails, if the open space program hadn't been put into place where we can create that wall, that boundary that stopped a lot of that annexation, downtown had the golf course gone under during the recession and been developed out of Rindu, not only would it change our character and the community that we are and the community that does put our rural and our natural landscapes forward, and I think that's like a characteristic we all carry, but also it would have changed our schools, and then by changing our schools that would change why people move here, why people stay here. So I truly can't imagine what Granville would be, because I think our open space program, and again, we're only one of 2 townships in the whole state that does this, I think really sets us apart and sets apart the characteristics that we all carry for what we want for our community, and it definitely sets us apart on the stage. Okay.
Thank you. We heard Jim mention briefly in the video that prior to voter approval for the levy in 1997, township officials used a variety of strategies to fund the purchase of land and development rights, and also to negotiate those purchases. So I wonder, Norm, if you could talk about a couple of those.
It's probably the accountant in me that worries about the details and all the nitty gritty. But I wanted to back up just a little bit before I start that. I was fiscal officer for 28 years, retired in March of 2013. During that time, I had the pleasure, most times, of serving with 12 different trustees. I can't speak for all of those trustees specifically, but they were interested on an overall basis in preserving open spaces. As Doug mentioned, what's a rural area without agriculture? And they were also interested in providing open areas for recreational uses. The strategies, some of which have been mentioned before, buying property outright, buying development rights where a property can't be built upon, limiting the development of that. We used our general fund money. We had several sources of that for some of those sorts of things. The open space levy passed in 97, first collected in 98, and began to generate money. The trustees were forward thinking, I think, in setting up the advisory boards that were there. It helped people in the village understand that they had a relationship in what we were trying to do. And it also gave us a wealth of strategic brain power, if you will, people who could work on that. The trustees had no interest in any eminent domain proceedings, even if they could have done that under the state law. They were interested in working with willing buyers and going to people. Some people would ask us, why don't you buy XYZ property? Well, if you're not interested in selling it, you couldn't do that. We developed, too, a number of partnerships that enabled the township to work through the different things, and I'll mention some of those in a minute. The Burt property that Eric alluded to in the video really started the whole thing back in 1991. It's a 54-acre property. It ran between State Route 16 and Silver Street. It had open space on it. It had old wood. And the thing I thought was very important was it actually was contiguous to some of the Spring Valley property. And contiguity is important if you want to walk between properties. It's very important that you have that. Over the next 18 years, the township made 3 additional acquisitions of Spring Valley property, wound up acquiring a total of 142 acres there. And this met a couple of objectives. One is green space visible from State Route 16, also visible from Route 37 out on the point. It also provided a recreation area because that became Spring Valley Park. The people that the township worked with in that particular case were the Licking Land Trust. They did a lot of the legwork in working with the Roberts family and be able to negotiate a final transaction. The township had talked to them many times over the years, and we weren't successful in completing that. The Land Trust got that done. The state of Ohio helped. The township, being a public entity, could borrow money or could apply for grants. And in this particular case, the state provided some grant money. We also, again, thanks to the Land Trust, received a substantial donation from Denison. And we probably wouldn't have thought to approach them for that. But all of that came together to create that, again, vista view and also the parkland. Across the street from that, the township acquired 122 acres of the property that belonged to the estate of Paul Kent. 73 of those acres were purchased with open space money. And Jim and I used to noodle when we would have a property to see what we wanted to do in terms of how much money we had, whether we could borrow, what the terms might be on that, what made sense to do what. And we wound up financing 73 of those acres. The levy had just passed the year before and we didn't have enough cash to buy it. So we issued some notes, I think maybe to the family. I don't remember exactly how we did that. But we bought those 73 acres and then we bought the remaining 29 acres with general fund money. And general fund money gave us great flexibility in terms of what we could do with the property. That ultimately led to our acquiring 130 acres of farmland out on Berg Street. And you say to yourself, wait a minute, you're on 16 with property here, how did you get out to Berg Street with that? Well, about the time that all this was happening, a group of local citizens had approached Kendall, which was an organization that created assisted living facilities, retirement home things, and had approached them about coming to the area. And Kendall came to town. They entered into a purchase contract, or maybe an option on the land, to buy 130 acres of farmland out on Berg Street, immediately south of the intermediate building, which wasn't, I don't think it was there at the time, but it was in that location. They held a series of community forums and they decided Berg Street was the wrong location to be in. So they had then identified a property on State Route 16 that was available across the intersection of Granville Road. And the problem was they didn't have enough acreage. So they couldn't meet the zoning requirements for a continuing community, a continuing care residential community. And the township trustees were interested in having Kendall come to town. And they were able, because we had bought property with general fund money, to negotiate a transaction with Kendall to sell them 27 acres. That gave them enough acreage in order to be able to do what they were interested in doing. The trustees negotiated it at a market rate of interest, current rate, but they also included in that purchase contract the fact that they would give and assign to the trustees the purchase option they had for the land out on Berg Street. So we had the ability then to buy 130 acres of property out on Berg Street at a 2-year earlier negotiated price, but get a current rate for what we were doing with Kendall. We issued notes. We paid on those for a while to buy that Berg Street property, but it just kind of led to a number of things that happened out on Berg Street. The last specific example I had was one of recreational areas. I remember Jim coming into one of our township meetings one night and saying, we've got a problem in this community. We have no recreational areas to play sports other than basically school facilities, or in some cases Denison's facilities, that they were willing to let us use them. Trouble is they needed to use them also. So it wasn't in fact just turning them over to us. And we had kids that couldn't play ball, Soccer was just coming on. We didn't have that ability. So we wound up, Jim had identified some floodway fringe over, it was east of the golf driving range on River Road. And over the course of 1993 and 2003, we purchased 68 acres of land there. We obtained a $100,000 grant from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. They gave us a NatureWork grant to develop that course initially and those sorts of things. So we wound up being able to develop fields that people could use. That park is now being managed by the Granville Recreation District for the township. Forward-thinking trustees, they use general fund money. They used the open space money when that became available. As Jim mentioned, in '97, we put a levy on, and we were the second township in the state to pass one. Anderson Township in Claremont County passed the first one. We obtained state grants. We even got a federal grant for federal farmland, Ranch Land Protection Act. But we got money to help buy property out on Loudon Street for that. We've had private donations, and we have worked well with the various partners that have helped us with this program. I'm pleased myself to have been associated with it. I think the trustees have done a nice job of working with the community, attempting to identify properties that make sense strategically to acquire. And I'm hopeful that the community will continue to support the open space program. We all know prices are going up and nobody likes to pay more taxes, but we do appreciate the ability to raise money from people to provide support for them. So that's all I've got.
Thank you. Thanks, Norm.
I don't want to follow that.
Thank you, Norm. Well, that was a great segue to my next question, and that is the Open Spaces levy has been approved by voters every 5 years since 1997. Has it ever been, Keith, you alluded to the maybe a bit of a challenge at first, but has it ever been a challenge since then to get voters to approve this? Do you want to see the levy continue, and if so, for how long?
Yes, I want to see it continue for as long as possible. I can't say about subsequent levies. I know, Doug, you were involved. I do know that the second levy was far more successful than the first in terms of the vote. And there's probably a lot of things to attribute that to. And there were properties that we bought were visible. But I think it's critical for the community to continue, particularly now, to continue to invest in itself. And you cannot, there is no way that you can protect the kind of community that exists out there today legally. There's not enough zoning laws that you can write. If you want to really protect it, you've got to own it. And I think that's what, with Jim's leadership and the trustees and Norm and Doug, that's really what brought us here in the first place.
Norm's probably going to share the figures, but the levies have passed overwhelmingly since that first one that was just launched now, but 60% or better, 60-40 A and A. Most levies pass by 2% points if you're lucky, and these have always been off the charts as far as numbers go. So that just speaks to the support that the community has bought into this whole program here. So I think that makes it, as if you're chairing a levy committee, you're thinking, just don't screw this thing up. Because people are going to do this if you don't screw things up. So put a few signs out, put some signs up in the properties that we've done. That logo that was up there was part of a levy committee we did way back when. And we put a contest out in the community. We had a $100 reward, what do you call it, for doing that. And I forget the guy that did that. He was a local community guy.
I thought it was a high school.
He was like I think it was a young kid, but he just that just spoke to everybody at that time. That was going to be a logo from here on out. So those signs we see on the road, those properties that we have, if they stay up, some get knocked off by people go down the road. But for the most part, those signs do mark the properties, and that's just, you go down the road, you think that's a good place to be for that. So.
And I'll say, like continuing the levy for as long as the community will support it. I told Rob I was going to say it. I'm speaking only as myself. But I also think, that our levy can be used in ways too to protect our community, even if it's right outside of our township borders. And is there ways that we need to look at natural resources that impact our community and areas that impact our community that might be right outside? And how do we make sure that we're not making our vision so little? I listened to what Norm and Jim and Keith did at the beginning and how they swapped lands and leveraged and loaned. And that is so unique, and it was so creative in how they did that. And I want to make sure that we don't tie our hands to, we only buy this land, for this amount of money, if it appraises at this. How can we continue to be creative and continue to use these levy funds to protect our community? As we all know, it's going to happen. Incredible encroachment is going to come. Incredible pressures are going to come into our community. So what can we be doing? I also think that long term, I attend the Coalition of Ohio Land Trust meetings every year, and we, sit around and have conversations too about what happens in the future. If we need to go and work and look at lands, or if we need to protect some of our easements, how do we, use some of those funds too to just make sure that we're always looking towards the future, that we're not handcuffing ourselves to only what we can think about today. Make sure that we're thinking long term into the future. Yeah. Okay.
Norm, did you want to?
I used to keep track of all the levy results and what the votes were. The only thing I didn't do, though, was keep track of what else might have been on the ballot at the time. And of course, whatever else was happening could have impacted that. The first time the first bill, and I do have to say one other thing, I've been gone from office now for 10 years, and Jerry Miller, my successor, has kept us up. I was so pleased to see that. The 1 mil initially passed at 57%. The 2.5 mil passed with 62%. So it went up by a rate higher than what we did for the first mil, and I do think people appreciated it. But the 1 mil basically needs to be renewed every 5 years. Passed at 57, 71, 70, 57, 70, 71. The 2.5 mil passed at 62, 57, and then back up at 68. So I like to think, when I look at all the levies that we've passed over the years, that we've had very good support from the community for this.
You bet. Thank you. So we heard Bryn and the video talk about how the township has collected 16 million, spent about 11, so that means there's 5, right?
But maybe Norm knows better.
Well,
Jerry.
I can pass the microphone directly to you. So that's just context for this question. With the rising cost of property, and it's shooting up dramatically here, will the township have enough money for future acquisitions? And in hindsight, should the 2.5 mil levy have been retained?
Yes, I think the 2.5, would be useful right now, but I don't think that it's dire. I think the Intel impact is, for the moment, it strikes me that there's a lot of wild speculation going on, and that nobody really knows what the impact of that project is going to be. It'll be significant. I don't want to diminish it. But there's so much rhetoric around it now that I have a hard time believing that it's gonna, the barbarians are at the gate. I think there's time to make sure that, we continue to invest in ourselves and create the kind of community that we want. But to do that, you've got to invest, and I think the 2.5 mil would be useful.
Yeah, I would second that on the 2.5 mil. So we wish we had that. I won't go into that, but that was just kind of cut off. It wasn't really, it should have been left up to the voters, in my opinion, that way, but somehow that disappeared. So that's another story. So either way, could we use more money? Yes. And I think there's a lot of work still could be done. And with the Intel, there's a lot of speculation, like Keith said, but I think it's only going to, price land's going up. We're not making any more of it, so we better get what we can while we can. As Brent said, everybody knows we can't say we want your land. It's people come to us. We have different criteria we look for that. But there's definitely plenty of properties that we would like to see in the program. And, people want to entertain that thought, they should contact us there too.
Yeah, I mean, people want to say like the Intel effect is going to make it so we can't buy any land, and I definitely don't see that happening. Again, creative ideas that come from Mr. Havens, even to start going out and talking to some of these landowners about first right of refusals and purchasing those, because we do have landowners who I think are interested, they're curious, but at the same time they're also hearing from investors, your land's worth $1 billion. And so they don't want to make that decision today of their $1 billion payout. And so how can we say, we don't know the future, we don't know what's going to happen with all this rhetoric. Can we be at the table when you make this decision? Can we then come, and if you want to sell it to a farmer or somebody who can keep it in agriculture, can we help, buy down that density? Can we help make it more affordable for that farmer to come into this property? And so I think that we are thinking creative. I mean, still to this day, we're so lucky that these people are all still in our community, because we've had opportunities that have come up where we are trying to still think creative. How can we make it work? But the thing is, we do have to have willing sellers. I mean, we do have to have landowners who want to participate, and I think that's where the community also comes into play. In our comprehensive plan that we're working on right now, in the future, one of the things that I started to really make sure we're including is that it is fun to say, like, we support rural character, we like our farming community, we love the way it looks, but if we don't support agriculture, then we're gonna have all these open fields that might not be able to produce the same way. So how do we as a community support smaller agriculture, support more creative agriculture, and in doing so, help find ways for these landowners to transfer their farms into smaller farms, and that we aren't a community that just likes to look at big open fields, but then no farmer can afford to farm here. And so we also have to think creatively about that if we want to continue to preserve farmland or open space, recreation space. So, but we're really lucky that everyone's still involved and comes up with creative ways to use the money we have.
The way it turned out is that if you have a pool of resources, you can then have leverage and partner with others, and then that has a multiplier effect. Norm was kind of walking you through kind of the consequential series of activities that occurred. It happened also if you are in, when you listen to Wes Sargent talk about the White Farm. Across from the White Farm was the intermediate school. And suddenly you could begin to link with other public entities, so we could leverage the balance sheet of the school system, for instance. Denison then was also a partner. You've heard the land trust. And so the larger partner you can be, the better off you are and the more of a voice you have. As Keith said, litigation and trying to do this through zoning is not really a useful tool. You're much better off to build as large a pool in a reservoir as funds as you can manage. Here's the other thing. Short-sightedness would say we have money sitting in our account, and do you really need it? And the reality is you don't know what walks down the road. You never realized that the Granville golf course and the partners there at that point in time were willing to sell their development rights. Like Kenny Moore said, it was completely opportunistic that the Longaberger, that property was slated to be, privately used. Suddenly, all of a sudden, it falls into our lap, and we had resources to be able to buy it. So who knows what the next is going to be. And I will say this about the folks that succeeded us. They've been exceptionally creative. The O'Neill farm that was bought out on 37, that is a gem of a piece of property that we were able to acquire. And they did some incredibly creative things with the 130 acres that Norm talked about. Well, they were able to sell that farm and keep the development easement on it to get the money back and still keep that land preserved. And so they've done really great creative things. Having that 2.5 mills, the community, as Norm had mentioned, has highly supported it. And so if it was on the ballot, I would vote for it.
Thank you. So we know there are some people in the room who are interested in perhaps picking your brains even more than we are tonight. I'm wondering, as you look back or reflect on what's going on now, is there anything that you would suggest doing differently now in setting up or funding an open space program like this one? What lessons did you all learn that could be shared with others?
Just because I'm in it today and like dealing with this day in, day out, you know, it would have been good to be able to use these funds in neighboring communities earlier. We look at what's happening in Union Township, and we can protect Granville Township all we want, and we will do an incredible job, and Granville Township is very much set apart in that, but we're going to be impacted by these surrounding townships. I think the surrounding townships, the former trustees, you know, they also looked at this program maybe a little sideways, like, what are that Granville people thinking? And I'm not, you know, originally from Granville Township, and I grew up in a different township that has always kind of said, like, well, you guys can do it because you're more wealthy, you have the resources, you have the funds. And I think had we been able to work with the surrounding townships and getting them on board, it could have been really amazing for all of Licking County. And so even to this day, I try and talk to other trustees in other townships and say, it's not too late, because you can come up with creative leveraging and partnerships. And like, I would hope that if you live in a different township, you talk to your trustees about putting this on the ballot, because it's hard to see other townships around us who are kind of struggling in these things, and I wish we could just go like set it up and save them.
Well, I wish we could have acquired the Craner property, and Norm, that was a complex, really complicated deal. I don't know if we could go back in time, if we would have kind of tried to approach that in a way, but complexity is always an enemy in situations like that. And
Can you say where that is?
yeah, so, you know, the way we looked at the town, you know, you can look at where annexation corridors are likely to impact us from other communities. And so the southeast is obviously adjacent to Newark. Brent mentioned to the south of us in Union Township, Heath. Newark also, along Price Road, looked to be one of those problem areas where our school district is not coterminous with all these other communities. Only so much Granville Township can control. So many of these other political jurisdictions, I think, where there's seven total political jurisdictions that the Granville School District overlays, those districts control the zoning activities that are there. And so that northeast quadrant looked to me as a future annexation corridor that would be coming toward us, and it was a very large block of land, I think over 500 acres, that we tried to come up with a special vote levy to acquire it, and weren't able to do that. So you'd ask if a levy had failed. It really wasn't a levy, but it was a special vote that we put on the ballot to try to acquire that property. So I wish we could have acquired it. These big blocks don't come along very often.
Anybody else want to talk about advice you'd give, lessons learned?
Also notice how everything is named after the last name of the original landowner. So if you have lots of land and you want your name to live in infamy, like I've tried to get us to use addresses, but they don't. So.
The only advice I would have is to get started. It's an imperfect process, and you're never going to get it exactly right. You're going to learn as you go, and everyone's experience is going to be different. And but if you don't start, you know, while you're trying to figure out the perfect formula for it, you'll never get anywhere.
Thank you, Bryn. The same thing applies in the village. We've lived in our house for 31 years, and it's still the Owen house. So the 8-member Open Spaces Committee is described on the township website. Doug, you lead that committee. Can you tell us a little bit about the committee's work and whether it's still functioning? Is it functioning differently today than it did in the past, and have the goals and strategies changed?
Thank you. Well, as I said in the video here, the committee has been comprised of various, you know, the council members, the school board, Judge Brown and others have been on the committee over the years. So we've had a good contribution from various sectors and various entities that would have a say in the matter. So we kind of try to see who wants what. I think the school board, we haven't really stated that's a purpose of the open space levy is to keep the school density down, but I think it is. That's realistic. We want to keep the density down as much as we can. So we've kind of paralleled our discussions with what works for the community, and that's certainly hopefully to support the schools that way. So the committees have been, we've had scoring systems, we've had people come to us, we've kind of rejected properties. It's just a whole, it's like we're saying, it's not a perfect process, but it is a process. And it's somewhat a filtering process or two. So we visited farms and different places like that. And we kind of, it's almost a gut feeling, you know it's right when it's right. There's places that we see that we know we want. We've had strategic places like along the borders, especially that southeast border, trying to keep Newark annexation coming in. That was definitely a good strategic move to keep that from coming in and taking up some sections of the Granville Township there. The parklands, I wish we personally could have had more parkland purchases, because a lot of these acquisitions we have been for development rights only. So the landowner still controls it, we just control what they can do with it at the eventual point. So most of these purchases we've had for development rights has said you could have your 100 acres and 1 or 2 houses, but that's it. So every purchase has been customized to what the landowner wants, what the committee, the township will agree to, and it's just a win-win for everybody in situations like that. So in certain cases, we, as a committee, we help pave the process, but sometimes we get out of the way of the process so that township trustees can get creative and make their thing happen.
Anybody else?
I think too, like right now, especially like a gut check, like on the one that we just did where we sold the 130, put an easement and kind of traded that for the cow farm on the Fairview. You know, that was a kind of a big decision for us to make, selling properties and moving things around. And so listening to you guys and your input on how best to negotiate that and manage that was really helpful.
That's great.
Okay, thank you. So looking to the future, you've mentioned some areas of the township that you want to make sure are protected. Are there air pressure points that you see now, or maybe if you can look around corners or into your crystal ball, you can say, here's where we need to go next? Is the north side, for instance, a sleeper for development? Is there something else that should be protected, like drinking water and where people might drill for water? I'll put that out there for you all to look into your crystal balls.
Well, drinking water seems obvious. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so what's going on out there right now in my mind is just, a lot of sort of rampant speculation, uninformed speculation. There's out of town investors coming in, buying land, paying silly prices, and it's land that really isn't in the path of any development. It's, it'll be decades before it could be, sewer could be brought to it. They're paying prices that would require densities that just aren't happening. Now, it's not everywhere. There are pieces that are changing hands that are eminently developable, but there's a lot of just sort of crazy things going on there, which makes it a little bit challenging. On the other hand, there's going to be some people who are willing to sell land in the years ahead that could be prime for us, and they're going to be, frankly, taking a haircut on it. And if we were opportunistic, had the funds, I think there's great opportunity for that. I agree with Bryn in that the open space funds should be able to be utilized outside the township. Some of the most, it could well be that some of the most strategic acquisitions lie outside the township boundaries, and that's something to think about in the future.
I think one thing that we've probably lacked trying to get is some of these outright purchases that could be used for passive recreation, because we can't build on these properties, so we don't want to, it's different than the park or the recreation district that Norm was talking about. But I still, if I had it my way, I would like to see some areas, because there are some real jewel properties out there that might be a legacy property, and we can't name the properties that we're thinking about because you can't go to somebody's house and knock on their door. But we've definitely had about 3 properties that we would say we'd love to have that place bought with general funds and turn that into a kind of a parkland type of area, so people could recreate, just like the Salt Run Park. That's the perfect example of what we wish we had more of around here. So if I had my way, which is their vote, that'd be something I'd like to see more of there.
I think I said before, I mean, I look at the boundaries. The drinking water has been on our radar longer than the current news cycle. And, you know, when in this last year, one of the things that we talked about with the Open Space Committee, and we had a meeting, was really looking at properties along our creeks and along our rivers that are, you know, already zone conservation, but how can we even protect those more? How do we look at some of our natural resources that we want to make sure we're protecting? And so, you know, that has been something that we've already talked about and approached property owners over. I think, like you were saying, the recreation space for sure is on our mind, and, you know, with Granville Rec and the village and looking at some of those, the 30 acres that we bought from O'Neill that have the cows on them currently, we did put a first right of refusal saying, you know, in 20, 30 years, if they choose to sell that, could we come back and then buy it as a park? You know, like, could we come, if they're not willing to do that now, could we look at that in the future? So how can we be strategic? Because I agree, the passive recreation is something that we're going to need to really continue to think about. You have ideas.
Come on, Jim.
I would go back to the northeast quadrant. The way I've looked at it is to look at your annexation corridors. And so those are the things that have been the most challenging to manage. So it's a combination. You know, Brent has done a remarkable job in partnering with neighboring communities. I mean, we had a bad relationship with Newark for a long time. Brent's actually brought that relationship along and sensitized the elected officials there that, you know, they also are voted. Their votes also impact the kids that go to our school systems. I look at big blocks of land that you could acquire. And so that northeast quadrant along Price Road is still an area that when I drive, it's wide open and there's lots of beautiful things that could be done along that corridor. Our St. Albans Township borderline along the west, I look at every single one of those properties. That's the most immediate area that's going to come. There's lots going on between Alexandria and St. Albans Township, and then you look at the interchanges, which will become sort of generators of development along those areas. So if you can manage and control some of the access points, so, you know, Wes Sargent wanted to acquire McPeak Lodge, and he was very adamant about doing it, and I kind of didn't pay attention enough at the beginning of it. Then I realized, you know, McPeak Lodge is right along Raccoon. The village of Granville provides their water, so the more ways in which we are partnering and sort of in the mix about things that can come at us, I think the better off we are. I really think it could be a great time now to put together another think tank of folks and sort of just reconsider everything, because you can sort of hear Keith and everyone else's opinions. It's kind of pretty diverse, and come back sort of with a retargeted formula and to assist in this acquisition process, because it's complex. So I think that would be something worth considering.
Very good. Norm? All right, how much time do we have? 20 minutes?
Eat well.
What's that?
Eat well.
And we're going to 8:30?
Yeah.
All right, so let's take some questions. Mr. Dixon?
Craig Dixon, concerning the easements that have any of them ever been challenged?
So the question is, of the easements that you've acquired, have any of them ever been challenged?
No, I mean, correct me.
Well, there's a lot of people have come to us and said, how do we make this go away? Well, so one thing I think would, like, it would be wonderful if we had a Norm who could take a look at what we bought these properties for over time, and now look at what their value is, and just to see the incredible investment that that community has made, what a great investment it was. You know, I don't think people look at expenses of their taxpayer money in the sense that they really have done a marvelous job in the development business. I mean, they've been wonderful developers and they've created huge value. So people look at these big open space properties, and you know, some of those easements allow one house to get built in a 50-acre parcel. And so we've had lots of people come back to us and say, how do we make this go away? And luckily, this law that was created makes it impossible without the legislature doing something. And I don't even know that the legislature could change it because it would be an ex post facto law. So if you think about it, you agreed to vote for that levy under those conditions at that time. So I don't really think retroactively it can be changed. And so it's protected as I understand that you can legally protect an easement.
And I'll say the conservation easements, again, working with the Coalition of Ohio Land Trust, are upheld by the state Supreme Court over and over. The latest, in 2018, there were two conservation easements in other communities that went before the state Supreme Court that were written just like ours, actually, Austin Leiter, right, who is our assistant prosecutor who works with us and oversees all of these. He said that that's actually where he got a lot of his templates from. And so these two were brought before the state Supreme Court. State Supreme Court upheld both of them. One of them actually felt really bad for the landowner. And the state Supreme Court said, you signed the dotted line, you took the money, you can never get out of it. And then last year, what was really exciting is AEP and Columbia Gas were trying to put utility lines across a major conserved land. It was not far north. And everybody assumed that the state Supreme Court would err on the side of the utilities because utilities get everything. And actually they didn't. And they said, no, you cannot go through this land that has conservation easements on it. So we continue to feel a lot of hope with those rulings that keep coming through. So.
Bryn, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the nice things that we had set up was a land management committee. We were taking a page out of the playbook from the Licking Land Trust. They were going out each year, physically observing their properties, walking them, making sure that nobody was violating the terms of the easements and that. And I will admit, we had let that slide a little bit. And so we followed their lead. Land committee goes out, I believe, each year, and they're documenting that somebody doesn't come along and start building a house, and the next thing you know is they violated the terms. Then you got a judge that has to say you got to tear that house down because it's already built and those sorts of things. So again, the township's keeping up on the sorts of things that need to be done to supervise these easements and that. And again, you have different circumstances where you actually own the property and then you're renting it out for agricultural use and that versus somebody that has an easement on their property they still own.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes. Tell us your name and.
So my name is Amy Mock, and I'm actually with the Licking Land Trust. I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about what are your criteria generally for selecting properties, either for easement or for purchase. Because obviously we get a lot of folks coming to us, and I'd like to know when we should say, go to the township and ask them about what they're looking for.
So the question for the recording is that what are the general requirements and considerations in acquiring these easements or purchase?
Some of the criteria in the past, I'm kind of going off the top of my head here, but so some properties that adjoin other properties, so bing, 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 3 in a row, that works for everybody. So a lot of things, we had a scoring system that included, imminent, we had a whole bunch of different categories, but just to summarize some of those, properties that were at risk for imminent development, like we knew something's coming, can we get ahead of that before it's too late? That's a thing that we'd like to do. So if there's 200 houses coming, you you could look at it both ways, but if you look at it from a conservation standpoint, in our opinion, that's something we try to prevent. And that's obviously subject to other people's opinion, but that's where we stand right now. So development pressure was a biggie there. Again, adjacency to other things, other properties that are in the program. The scenic byways, so as you go down the road, you're looking at nice scenery versus in somebody's garage. so that was a part of the process there too. Trying to think of other things we had on there, but just agriculture preservation for sure. We had we had like family farms there, and we had there's Ohio Century Family Farm program. We're trying to, if you had a heritage in your farm, like 100 years, we'd like to protect that versus, so just lots of little things like that we would use. And again, a scoring system was somewhat objective, but there's always that thing that feels right. You have to look at it that way too.
But I would say anybody who's ever interested, please send them our way. I think in the past, it was like huge blocks of land were definitely more preferred. But at the same time, we do get people who bring up land, but it's so far from any encroachment or any utilities ever being put down. We might not be able to work on that right now because we're focused on other areas. But I think there are even small parcels that we are looking at and are interested in because of what they protect and where they are in the community. So please always send anybody our way. Anybody.
Just as one example, Bryn mentioned accepting small parcels. Eric Jones came into a meeting and said he knew somebody that was interested in donating 7.4 acres of land to the township. Where is it? Well, it was south of the bike path, north of Raccoon Creek. The trustees took a look at it, and it was on the other side of where the park was. They kind of looked at it, and thought, well, the guy wants to give it to us. We can give him the benefit of a charitable donation to a governmental entity. That wound up being where the bridge abutment for the bridge going from the park to connect to the bike path went. And if we hadn't owned that, we'd have probably been paying a fair amount of money to somebody to put a bridge abutment on it. And so we took that property because somebody was interested in doing something. And there were a lot of benevolent reasons people do things. They're not always out for every dollar they can get. And again, the trustees tried to be responsive to those types of requests. And it sure made a lot of sense when that bridge got done.
That was a genius move. Anybody wants to donate land, come on up here after. Other questions? Sherry?
Yeah. I'm wondering, because Jim said something that made me think about this. Is it possible for the trustees to sell off land that you actually own that has been invested now for 20 years to get the cash to buy land that might work somewhere else? Mm-hmm.
So the question is, can the trustees sell land that is in the program and owned by the township?
Yes. And that is actually what we just did. So the land that, what was the original name? The 130 acres that's south of the intermediate schools.
Yeah, Kennedy Raider,
The Kennedy Raider property, again.
No relation.
Yes. So that 130 acres was owned outright by the township and had no conservation easement over it. Under Ohio Revised Code, if we purchase land using our open space dollars, there's very limited uses we're allowed to do with it as long as it's in use and purchased with open space dollars. But we can sell it. And so luckily you guys voted in really good trustees like us who care about open space, and why that's always a huge question when we have election time and we have new trustees come in and you say, what do you think of the open space program? I know somebody who wanted to run and he was telling me how he thought it was great we had all this money invested and one day they could sell it. So you always want to ask. So that property we sold recently, like 2 months ago, to Phil Watts, and in selling it, we put a conservation easement in the deed. And so now that land is actually more protected forever than it was when we owned it outright. Most of the money went back into our open space program, and then we used a little bit of it to purchase a conservation easement on the 30 acres and a first right of refusal on the 30 acres that he has cows on Fairview that we all love. It's so cute.
So Sherry, in that case, it had to be sold for someone who wanted to farm it. Mm-hmm. It had to be an agricultural use. Now the example Norm was giving you about where we would sit down and we would use a combination of general fund money and open space money. And that would have been the Quisenberry Farm, we call the Quisenberry Farm, which is across from Spring Valley, which is what partially got sold off to Kendall at the time. So had we purchased all of that with open space money, we could not have really sold it for any meaningful purpose. But the fact that it was combined with unrestricted funds, general funds, it could be sold and then Kendall could use it. So yes, there's some thought process. So another part of the same thought process was used when the acquisition of the Granville Golf Course. So there was partnering with the village of Granville, who was very interested in using some of their money to acquire some of the areas that immediately were adjacent to some of the arterial roads. The idea being in the distant future, if they wanted to build a community center, they could do that. And so that land was bought with a combination of funds that could be used and developed, and then the portions of the golf course that you were not going to develop, you could layer that with open space funds. So there are strategies around doing that. Norm and I would not want to have used open space funds to purchase a piece of property we thought that later in the future could be sold, and that money then could in turn be used, leveraged then to buy other land. So there was a decision making around it. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Chuck, you have a question?
Yeah, how much money is there in the open space fund right now unspent, and are there any acquisitions?
Just repeat the question.
Norm, how much money is in the open space fund currently?
The nice thing about being retired is I can't tell you.
Really? It's a little over 6. 6.5 is currently in the open space fund. Again, some of that came from this recent sale. And yes, there are, we have a few, sticks in the fire. We have some stuff going on. So, yeah. So hopefully a few of these will work out and be well received by the community.
Something imminent?
Can't say. Because then all of a sudden somebody's gonna be like, I'm gonna pay you triple and put 1 million houses there.
Well, you don't have to tell us where it is. I'm just sharpening up my pen here.
So one of them is very hopeful.
Good. Time for one more question. Any last questions? Yes.
You referenced the lapsing of the 2% levy. Was there a story behind that?
It was a 2.5 mil levy, and I'll let somebody. The question is, the 2.5 mil levy was on and then lapsed, or was not renewed, or it wasn't put on the ballot, right?
So you have cycles of trustees with different priorities there. I think there was a cycle that they were looking at ways in which they could reduce taxes. And so when a levy is up for renewal, there's a process for making sure that it gets back on the ballot. At times, I think there would be special levies for purchasing fire equipment, for instance, that once that levy had done its job, it wouldn't be renewed any longer. In this particular case, I think the philosophy of the trustees at the time was, we don't really foresee the need ourselves to renew the 2.5 mil levy. So they let it lapse, and then it wasn't put back on the ballot.
Was it automatic, or would it have to go on the ballot to be renewed?
No, I think their 5-year levies is the way they've always been done. I think levies can be permanent. I'm not sure that these levies, you can make them permanent, but they were always when I was a trustee, we always felt accountability was important. So we didn't want to pass them more than 5 years. Let people judge, the merits of it, and if they felt good about it, then let them renew it. We felt that was important, that we be accountable and that they felt continuing partnership in what was being done.
So I think the state law precludes those being permanent.
That's what I thought. So Norm knows the answer. You can't make them permanent.
We're 2 years into this current 5-year cycle.
So the current 1 mil levy was renewed 2 years ago. So you have 3 years remaining on the 1 mil levy.
So there's a quick follow-up in the back.
I was a trustee when that happened. So I probably have
Okay, yeah, we need you to,
I was Paul Jackson. I was a trustee when that happened.
you want to come up so you can, we'll get,
I think most people can hear me.
we're recording, so we need to get you on the microphone.
So my name is Paul Jackson. I was a trustee when that happened. And so I have probably a little more knowledge of what was going on than most people. Ohio, and I think Norm can attest to this, requires that government agencies operate in a cash accounting system, which means you can't accrue. And they sort of look sideways on programs like the open space program, where you can accrue an immense amount of money because you probably aren't going to spend it all this year. You might spend some next year and some the year after that. But the account at that time, in that period, had grown to be a fairly significant amount. And the auditor challenged us that we were fundamentally moving to an accrual accounting system because we had so much money accrued. And so what we decided to do quietly was stop collecting it to see if we spent it over the next year. And we didn't. And we decided that probably the right thing to do was just not put it on the next ballot and let that amount come down. And now I'm going to make a personal comment, and that is, how much you spent, Brent? 16 million?
I don't.
No, how much you spent on property here?
What was it, 11 million? 11.
That's the total.
11.
Okay, and you've got 6 million in the bank. So we're back in that situation where there's an awful lot of money accrued. That doesn't mean that down the road, something shouldn't be put back on the ballot. But we were hearing from people that they didn't want to put any more money in the bank. And so we showed them how we were going to spend it. And I believe that very year we did the golf course. So there's another side to that argument that the world didn't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Good to know that history. And we could see that number go down here pretty soon, right? Because you're talking about some new deals. Sherry, we have a hot second.
It'll be fast, okay. So, given that situation, but language in the levy has changed in the last 5 to 10 years. It used to be you had to buy it within the township, but now, I think, Bryn, you alluded to this. You can reach outside the township as long as it's protecting the township.
It didn't
Hold on, Bryn. The question is, has the language changed to allow the open space levy to be used outside the township?
The ballot levy changed a long time ago. It wasn't in the last 5 to 10. It was one of the early cycles where actually, if you read the ballot language, it doesn't preclude us to spend it directly inside the township. We have always felt, the trustees, that the taxpayers would need to support something like that, and it would be something where we would have to ensure that we have the taxpayers' support to protect something that impacts Granville, whether it's water, whether we see what's happening upstream with in other communities too. If it's other ways that it could protect the community, I think we would need to know we have the taxpayers' support of doing something like that and going outside of the township. But yes, it was changed. The ballot language has been the same for a long time, but one of the early ones is different than the original.
All right. Thank you again to the visionaries on the panel and those who worked with them, and thank you all for being here, and thank you taxpayers for supporting this program. Another round of applause for the panel. Last word from Chuck.
Okay, thank you, Alan, for that marvelous job, and again to the panel. And thank you all for coming. I think we all learned a lot tonight, and I know I did. So, one housekeeping thing. If you're a Historical Society board member and you have your badge, please give it to me before you leave. Thank you.